Welcome to Something to Say, where we bring voices from diverse backgrounds who will share their unique stories and perspectives on finding their passion and provide insights on how you can find yours. Join us as host GregDeShields guides us through this enlightening journey.
Welcome to Something to Say Podcasts, a unique platform that amplifies the voices of individuals from various backgrounds sharing their passions. I'm your host, GregDeShields, and I'm pleased to bring you another episode. Thank you for joining us. And today we welcome Matthew Shapiro. Matt is the president of Campus Copy Center, a full-service printing and shipping facility, providing services to many large universities, hospitals, corporations, and private individuals. He is also the managing member of RCMS Properties, Living Large 1 and Living Large 2, through which he provides stable, affordable housing to over 100 individuals. A graduate of the University of Pennsylvania and Yale Law School, Matt was formerly a practicing attorney where he assisted on large, complex security litigation matters. Matt enjoys leveraging his diverse skills to build the deep relationships needed to effect positive change. He is interested in exploring and developing multifaceted approaches to tackle the most pressing issues facing our communities, and he is deeply aware that the arts and public works can provide a critical outlet, a sense of purpose, and developmental function. As an integral piece of his work, he is passionate about developing a sense of inclusion amongst those with whom he works, as he believes that everyone works better together when laughter and smiles are promoted. In his free time, Matt enjoys traveling, often in pursuit of eccentric food, diplomatic history, and classic rock music and concerts. Welcome, Matt Shapiro.
Oh, thanks so much for having me. I've been looking forward to this, excited to be a part of it, and I know it's going to be a great time.
Cool. Now, I know that you are a very busy person. You're constantly networking, connecting with business leaders, and also building your business empire. But I think for most people, they have this question about how do we get to know who that person is? So here on Something to Say, we have a bit of a get to know you section where we'll ask you some questions, both from like an icebreaker perspective and just your own personal journey. So are you up for that?
Absolutely. I think that all business is personal. So you want to work with people that you like. So I think you should know the people that you might end up working with.
Very cool. All right. So we're going to start at the beginning. So what's your favorite childhood memory?
Favorite childhood memory? It's always a loaded question, right? Because it's hard to pick one. But I'd say my knee-jerk reaction would be meeting Aerosmith way back when. Steven Tyler as a kid to me was, almost like godlike. I thought everything he did was so cool. When I would come home from high school and I wasn't the most popular kid in high school all the time, I would watch Aerosmith YouTube videos for hours, and that would make me happier even on the worst days. And I think kind of in that vein, just the kind of safety of childhood. Like I miss that generally. So the memories often kind of veer into those realms, just my mom and I are huge cooking show watchers, particularly anything that Gordon Ramsay would record. So some of the best memories I have just in general are sitting on the couch with her, watching TV late at night, eating some popcorn and Snickers, and just kind of feeling at peace and safe. I think that that's something that, again, that safety of childhood is something that we kind of lose a little bit as we get older and older and, have different responsibilities and whatnot. And those memories of just feeling absolutely secure in myself and where I was at in my place are often the best. And I'd say if there was one other one, I worked at Campus Copy Center, my business, when I was a child, probably 7, 8, 9 years old. My dad would bring me in September, August, and then again in January when we would be selling course materials at the beginning of each semester. Because it was just, I was just another body, right? I was someone that was checking people out at the front counter, and he just needed people to do that. And I thought it was the coolest thing in the world is a 7-year-old running around checking out 18-year-olds that to me were 40-year-olds at the time, So I remember that very fondly, and I can, look out my office window and think of myself being up front there, which is, makes me smile a lot.
Well, it's interesting how people connect with their childhood memories and how they really are very relevant to the way that they live their lives and the things that they do today. I think, like you said, it's a bit of a safe spot to go to back in your own memory as you kind of navigate the waters of today. But
Yeah.
what's funny is you talk about what it was like for you as a 7-year-old working the counter, being a part of the business. I spoke with someone yesterday who's in nightlife industry, on the bar and so forth. And one of his favorite childhood memories when he was 7, that his parents liked for him to be the bartender of the family. So he used to make rusty nails and black Russians for his parents.
That's a great knowledge to have as a young kid, right? You know, he was
I
the coolest
immediately
kid at
had
the
to
college
pull,
party.
I had to pull out my phone and see like what's in a rusty nails.
I don't know myself, to be honest with you, and I like to think that I'm a decent bartender.
It's scotch and drambuie. I mean, it looks very refreshing, but it probably tastes pretty intense. But yeah, so
We'll have to try it out, man. Maybe after our podcast episode.
absolutely. All right, so follow-up question to that, and I ask you this because you're certainly younger than a lot of people that I've interviewed. Maybe not the youngest, but younger. But the question I have for you is, so far, what has been your biggest failure, and what did you learn from that?
Yeah, that's always, again, another tough question, right? Because we all have lots of failures in life, even if we don't want to admit that. But one thing I think that sticks out is when I was in college, I really wasn't into Greek life. It wasn't something that really called out to me. I thought that there were a lot of negative aspects of it, not to say that there aren't positive aspects of it. But I was approached, I believe it was my sophomore year early on, by a couple individuals about helping to not build a fraternity necessarily, but to bring back one that had been at Penn before. Mm-hmm. And I thought that was a cool idea because it was this idea of bringing something new and fresh and unique and, this oversaturated Greek life that we have, to have some sort of new breed of fraternity. Now, that all sounds great on paper. Then you try to build it, right? And it turns out to be the exact same thing that every other frat has going on. You throw some parties, you have some people over once in a while, you do some brotherhood events, you do some community service, but there wasn't ever like this huge thread that kind of connected all of us individuals as brothers that were trying to build this. I don't think that we were similar enough of individuals to build some sort of cohesive whole. And I do think that that is important in Greek life or in any organization, that there's some sort of consistency and cohesion. And I think that was kind of an early on lesson of hard work in and of itself can be meaningless. It's great to work hard, but it's not enough. And I think a lot of kids, especially, kids like myself that grew up in like a nicer area and then ended up at a nice college like University of Pennsylvania, where, there was so many opportunities at your fingertips, you feel special. And, everyone is special, every human being is, but that kind of special that people have in their mind when they get to an Ivy League school at 18, 19 years old. Mm-hmm. And I think it's nice to get knocked down a few pegs. And I think it was good for me to get knocked down a few pegs. This didn't work out. You really tried. You put a ton of effort into this, a ton of heart, and it fell apart. There's no fraternity that, with that name that I tried to build when I was here. And, I definitely gave it my all. Now, I think, in terms of a positive lesson, I think I also made some of my best friends in trying to develop this fraternity. So I think in failure, you can have some success too, which is kind of, I think, a good takeaway. Mm-hmm. But I think that lesson of just, you can work hard and it just not work out. And I think that's something that's often lost today too, especially arguably in my generation, that, just because you put a lot of effort into something that you should get something from it. That's not the world. And I think that everyone needs to be taught that. And it humbled me.
Yeah. It's interesting you say that, because that experience in some form of a student organization really is your first foray into running an organization and kind of understanding the risk involved, the rewards involved, the, setbacks that are involved. But it helps to give you a sense of, well, as I move forward, I would not do it that way, or certainly learn that lesson as I go forward. So Great point out. It's funny. I was involved with a fraternity when I was at college, and I, for one reason or another, just didn't see the benefits of it, which, as I reflect back on it, kind of wish I maybe did stick with it a little bit longer. It's just when they woke me up at 3 o'clock in the morning and wanted me to jump in the Providence River, that was not going to be one of my glowing moments of feeling comfortable about being part of a fraternity.
Yeah.
So,
I definitely understand that. And I think that was one of my biggest fears too. I want to develop a brotherhood with individuals through some sort of positivity. Can we cook together? Can we work out together? Something exciting and fun and, value generating, as opposed to getting really drunk together or just being uncomfortable together. Just didn't really make much sense to me, I guess.
Didn't help much. So this is a pretty popular question that we have in terms of our icebreaker, and people really like to hear the response from individuals. So if you could have dinner with any historical figure, who would that be and why?
I've been asked this question before, and I always say I like the answer I'm about to give. I like because it almost encompasses a bunch of other individuals that I would like to speak to, because this person spoke to all of them. And perhaps it's a little bit cliche, but I would say Queen Elizabeth II. I just think that, perhaps no other leader in world history witnessed such change during the time in their position.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, she was born, I believe, in 1926, when monarchy was the rule, not the exception. Today, democracy is the rule, not the exception.
Mm-hmm.
And the worldview that she must have developed, having been born in 1926 in a royal family in the United Kingdom, must just been bizarre to vis-a-vis what you or I think about the world. But I mean, by the time of her death in 2022, you have nearly a century of political upheaval had taken place. Her own role within the government that ostensibly operates in her name was uncertain. Would the monarchy continue? Would it not? You never knew what she was thinking. She was absolutely wonderful at just keeping mum about everything, which I can't think of another politician or political-esque figure in history that was able to keep their opinions that tight. So I don't know. She's had a front row seat in meetings with some of the towering figures of the 21st century, other individuals who I might want to have dinner with if I had the opportunity to do so and bring them back to life. I mean, Winston Churchill, who held much of Europe together, at perhaps the most critical time in the last 100 years. Margaret Thatcher, Tony Blair. Truman was president when she became queen in 1952. Eisenhower was president when she was had her coronation in 1953. Just to have that kind of depth and breadth of knowledge and experience, and to get probably a unique perspective from a lot of these world leaders, right? Because they would meet with her and they knew that nothing they said to her was getting leaked. She would not opine on it publicly. So she probably was such a repository of interesting information that I just would love to see the world through her eyes to a certain extent, understand how she was able to stay in a position for 60 plus years and remain neutral, and express my admiration and respect for her in many ways. I think she was, in terms of monarchy, more progressive than most. She loved her people, it seemed to me. And I don't know, I just think it would be so incredibly interesting to get her perspectives and hear the conversation she had with others. And as a political science nerd, I'm obviously a history nerd too, but as a political science nerd, to understand just what was going through her mind is, the government in the UK itself, but also around the world. The governments around the world were shifting. And again, people were getting more power. And what that meant to her, how she felt about that, and how that challenged the notions on which she had been brought up. I just think that would be such an interesting conversation.
Well, I think also it was such a unique period of time because there weren't women, across the world, if not across the country, that were in these incredibly powerful leadership roles. And how, as you say, she maintained that level of influence throughout the majority of her life, regardless of how society was evolving or in some cases was slowing down. So I agree. We've never had her pointed out as one of the persons to have.
That's interesting. Yeah, because I think to your point about, a strong woman in power too. I mean, becoming queen in 1952, Winston Churchill, an older, cigar-smoking, blunt, gruff man, was the prime minister. And she had to have weekly meetings with him as I think she must have been in her 20s.
Yeah.
I mean, that must have just been earth-shattering to sit in that room across from Winston Churchill, the guy, that in Europe they were saying won World War II next to FDR, and to almost be his boss in a way, too. but not be able to act as a boss. It was just just an interesting interaction. I think it would be unbelievable to have been a fly on the wall there. And I think there are probably conversations that no one will ever be privy to that were probably intensely fascinating.
Yeah, well, I can only imagine what it probably would have been like to be a fly on the wall in the ladies' room when she stepped away from a meeting to go and recompose herself.
Yeah.
All the things she probably had to say.
I'm sure after meeting Jackie Kennedy or whatever, I know there's all the stories about the jealousy of Jackie Kennedy, and like there's just so much there's so many interesting narratives surrounding her and the family itself of the British monarchy, obviously.
Very cool. Wow. So let's talk a little bit more about you. So how big is your inner circle?
It's pretty small, honestly. I always say I have a big outer circle because I love people. I'm not one of those people that say I hate people. No, I love people. I love having people around me. I love being with people. I don't like being alone. Any of my friends or family will tell you that. So I like to cast a wide net. But in terms of like an inner circle, I mean, these are people that you have to be able to trust 100%. If I don't trust you 100%, you're not in my inner circle. I like to spend a lot of time with the people in my inner circle. Not everyone likes that, honestly. I mean, there are definitely people out there that are more introverted that like to be solo individuals. And I'm much more one of those guys that says, hey, if you're my best friend, like I'd love to see you every day. Obviously, that's not always possible, but that's important to me. Like FaceTime and that kind of contact, I think is critical. I mean, during the pandemic, that was driving me up a wall that I wasn't able to have someone in front of me. And it really kind of emphasized that kind of sense in my head that I need to be around people during that time. But yeah, it's pretty small. I'd say I have maybe 4 to 5 friends that have been around for a really long time that I trust like family. They are like family. They are family to me. I think friends are the family you choose. Yeah. And yeah, I have like a couple actual blood family members that are in that inner circle, and I lean on them. I rely on them. I think they lean on and rely on me as well. And we're always there for each other. And it's carried me forward in the worst times and the best times.
So it's funny. I interviewed a gentleman the other day, and he's probably in his mid 70s, and his inner circle is really family centric, which was interesting as he had talked about it most of the time. And you mentioned that there are a couple of family members who were part of your inner circle. Normally, we don't get that kind of response. We get like this kitchen cabinet or this front row of people, but that idea of family members is really kind of interesting. But without a doubt, we always get that sense that it is a very close-knit group of people, trusted people who will either tell you you're doing something right or you're doing something wrong, and they are unapologetic about it because they had that kind of ear with you. I guess that kind of takes me to the next question. So who's had the most influence in your life?
I mean, I guess, that kind of bounces off your last point too. It was definitely my parents. I always say that everything I've done in life has been with the objective of making them proud. I'm the first one in my family to go to college. My parents didn't always know kind of the directions in which to point me, but they always tried their best. They were humble with respect to what they didn't know, and they put me in touch with those who did know better than them, which I appreciate immensely because I think there are a lot of individuals, many of whom I know, that are led astray by their family members who have the greatest intentions, but don't have the humility to say, I don't know what I'm talking about here, so you should listen to someone who does. And my parents did have that, and that was really helpful for me. But they were also super supportive, even if they didn't have any clue what I was talking about. They were there for me. They listened. They acted like they cared. They made me feel good. And I say that, sometimes you need sympathy, sometimes you just need support, sometimes you need advice. I think these are 2 kind of different quadrants in life. You got sympathy, support, advice, and suggestions. But they knew when I just needed, help and just a shoulder to lean on, and when I needed, someone to point me in the right direction. And I'm deeply appreciative of that. And I think they shaped me into the person I am. Just on that note too, my dad was, running this business before I did. And I always marveled at kind of the way he could connect with anyone. It didn't matter if it was the CEO of a Fortune 500 company worth $8 billion. He could be friends with that guy. And he could be friends with the guy that was cleaning the stalls in the bathroom at said company. And that was the greatest lesson I took from him. I think I am able to interact with just about anyone. I went to college with a lot of individuals who can only interact with fancy, degreed individuals that are working at a big bank or a big law firm or a big hospital. And I think that's I think it's perilous, honestly, in higher education to a certain extent, that we're not taught better how to interact with just a normal human being and just interact on a personal level. When I first went to law school, I had a professor, a writing professor, that said, you're going to learn how to speak legalese, but the best lawyers are able to just present things in a way that the most uneducated person could understand.
I understand that, yeah.
And I know that that's something that, it's not a novel thought that this professor had necessarily, but it's very true. And I don't think enough credibility is put on that statement.
Mm-hmm. Wow. Interesting. I've heard discussions about, especially the really good attorneys are the ones who can take out all of the complication of thing and speak more as if it were to that of a first or second grader, so that people can, so that everybody can understand it. But clearly the influence of your parents have shown in the success that you've had, and certainly will continue as you go forward. So this is a little bit of a twist to the other question that I presented to you, but what was the best year of your life and what was the worst year of your life?
I mean, the worst is probably pretty easy. My dad died in 2022.
Mm.
That's not to say that there weren't wonderful things that happened in 2022, because there absolutely were, but I'd say that's the biggest kind of like stain on any year, obviously, losing, one of the two people or three people with my little sister that are most important in my life. So I think for the rest of my life, that'll kind of go down as the worst year. I mean, I also lost my uncle that year. I lost some cousins that year. I lost my great aunt that year. So 2022, which is kind of a year of death, it was also like a year of upheaval for me. My dad died. My life turned upside down. I was practicing law in Manhattan. I left that job kind of on a whim to take over the family businesses. We have staff that have been working here for 10, 20 plus years. I was not in any way, shape, or form willing to let these gentlemen lose their jobs. So I knew what I had to do, but I was thrust in a whole new role. I felt that I had to grow up. I know it sounds cheesy very quickly, because I know I am an adult, but I'm 29 years old, and I felt like I kind of was playing the role of like a 50-something-year-old as a business owner that was, managing staff and a whole host of apartment buildings where, we cater to low-income individuals, and these were lessons that needed to be learned, populations to be worked with that I hadn't worked with very much before. And it was a lot to pick up. So it was a rough year, but I mean, I will say there was light there, learning new things, engaging in new things, having a new job, a new position, and new things to do in life are often positive. So I try to derive something from it, but it was still the worst year. The best, I don't know, I like to say the best is yet to come. But if I had to pick one, probably 2016. It was the year I started, like I came out as gay to my parents in late 2015. I really started telling friends in my kind of community in 2016. People, for the most part, other than one individual, were receptive, easy, made me feel at home, safe, comfortable for the first real time ever. Not that I didn't ever feel safe or comfortable, but when you're lying about yourself incessantly for years, you feel like you're living a lie. And I think coming out just engendered a kind of sense of confidence in myself that I never before had. It pushed me to kind of, put myself out there in a way I never before had, and it just really grew me as a person. So I think that was a formative year. It was also the first semester of my senior year of college, which is always a wonderful year. I started applying to law school. I got into law school in 2016. So, when that happened, you start feeling safe about your future career too. I felt like it's the year I really became an adult, maybe not by way of age, but by way of just like mentality.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting how when we ask that question to people, both of those have this powerful influence in you as you go forward. As you talk about that worst year, it kind of, puts a line in the sand and helps you know like just how dark the world can be and how you can rebound from that, but also to be able to celebrate the jubilation of being able to, in your particular case, be your whole self, which probably contributed a lot to how successful you were as you did your graduation or went through your senior year and moved into your first year of your professional work. All right, so we've learned a lot about you. Thank you so much. Now we know that you're a super smart guy, and we want to ask you.
Don't flatter.
So I want to ask you some questions just in general around entrepreneurialism. And I think what's really relevant about it is because you have a much younger demographic perspective of it. So I want to ask you some questions around entrepreneurialism and what it kind of means to you or business operations today. So what are some of the significant trends that you're seeing that are taking place for entrepreneurs today?
I think information access is very interesting right now. And specifically by that, I mean like the access to AI that we have now. And I know that that's, kind of a classic example, but I mean, it really is, I think, upending every facet of society. The fact you could go on Google and type in a question now, and there's an AI little blurb that comes up. I think that quick access to entrepreneurs need to act quick. And I think the faster you get information, the faster you're then able to act and the more success you're hopefully able to then have. So I think that like information access has been huge. I also think there's been this kind of like push towards decentralization. And in many ways, I think singular individuals have more power in the economy today because information is more accessible. Messages can spread quicker. One person has a bad experience at, say, a restaurant. They can really do something about it. I mean, social media, review sites, they put a lot more power in the hands of an individual. And I think even 10 years ago, you didn't see that in the same way, maybe in a collective, but an individual voice has a lot of power today, which I think is a good thing. I think it democratizes just the economy. I think in terms of decentralization, you have the rise and perhaps fall now of remote work and the ability to do work in different places. I think it's made people a little bit more diffuse. They've been able to work within different environments. Environments affect our mindset. So I think that has like generated, a different breed of entrepreneurship. I mean, just look at Silicon Valley and the way in which that clearly environment itself engenders creation in, the tech world. It's wonderful. And then, I mean, even with decentralization, you have the rise of cryptocurrencies and continued, in my perspective, like governmental failures to regulate them. Like, I think one of the big trends right now is that society is pushing forward. Entrepreneurs are doing more stuff. They're developing these new technologies, these new economic outlets that are almost incomprehensible for our policymakers. I think we're in this moment where the economy is evolving so quickly and in such a complex manner. Like our traditional safeguards and the traditional gatekeepers, they can't keep up. Right. Politicians, business leaders alike, they often don't even understand certain of these emerging developments. And I think this uncertainty is everywhere anymore. It's infused with our politics as well. And it's created this just interesting environment for entrepreneurship. But I think that's also encouraged people to like push boundaries. Things are so uncertain. Screw it. Let's try this. Like, why not? Mm-hmm. And I think that's exciting. But I'd like to see how things continue to decentralize and the power of the individual continues to increase. I think that's a wonderful thing.
Yeah, you bring up a really interesting point, though, in terms of the ability for the Wild Wild West to get even wider, so to speak. Yeah. From where we were, from those who were very creative and imaginative about what they wanted to do. And if they had the access to the kind of information that we have today, who knows where we would have probably been as a society. I mean, even as you think of the birth of the computer and how limited the access was to that, and had there been more back then, what would it have actually looked like? So from entrepreneur, and also I think to your point, as entrepreneurs in small operations, startups, you're often burdened with like being the chief bottle washer, cook, and server, and paying the bills. But now there's tools that allow for you to be able to do that and more. And maybe it's not as arduous as it had been in the past in order to kind of get your footing, especially if you use the right tools the right way. But that's kind of the next, leads to the next question. What are some of the misconceptions that you see out there that you'd like to clear up for entrepreneurs?
Yeah, I mean, I think the pursuit of profits and success generally need not be incompatible with the public good. I think you could do good for yourself and others. And I think there's often a misconception out there that someone is well off, so they must have done it off the backs of others, or they must have done it in a way that harmed others. And that's certainly the case that it happens. It's not always the case that it happens. There are plenty of, sustainability focused entrepreneurs, like eco-conscious entrepreneurs out there today. There's so many buzzwords that I could throw out, but I think you and the audience would understand like where I'm coming from there. That entrepreneurship means so many things. And I think someone can do kind of good success for others and, still find success for themselves. Making money doesn't make someone, I don't think, bad. And I don't think wealth defines one's emotions, sensibilities, political beliefs, or the like. I also just think like relatedly, like pushing someone to change, like providing constructive criticism and kind of like any form of critique doesn't need to be considered mean or controlling. I think we're kind of at this place in society now that, if a boss critiques an employee and they might not say it in the nicest way, all of a sudden it's an issue.
Right.
Like a lot of people need tough love sometimes. And, I've received it myself, both, professionally, personally, familially, that's a word. But, and it's not the case that people are just trying to control me or they're being, rude to me. It's they're trying to help most of the time. And I think a lot of people could benefit from that. I mean, most people, myself included, could use improvement. And I think we all should seek out and kind of immerse ourselves in relationships where we're going to feel supported, but also where we're going to be pushed to grow. And I think this notion that you shouldn't try to push someone to change is misguided. I think everyone probably needs to change a little bit. And if you trust someone, you should listen to their perspective.
Right. And I think what you just said in terms of that ability to trust someone, but also to take into account that the authenticity of what they're sharing with you can be priceless, because what you would certainly not want is for someone to present a position of support when in fact it's not believed, or it's not really authentic in terms of how they see you, in order just to be nice to you or not be confrontational to you. So
I agree 100%. Like it's important to be able to hear people out. I think that's, everyone grows by listening to others. I mean, obviously you might have to filter through certain people's opinions, but if to go with one of our earlier things, if they're in your inner circle and they're suggesting that you make a change, at least consider it.
Consider it. That's absolutely. All right. So you talked briefly about artificial intelligence, but can you talk a little bit more about innovation and how are you seeing it affect you and the work and the business that you do?
Yeah, I mean, just equipment say for printing, for example, technology is just rapidly changing what we're able to just produce. And in the time in which we're able to produce it changes seemingly every couple of months. You used to replace printing machines, copiers, say every 5 to 10 years. Now you're looking at every 3 to 5 years because of the way in which they're able to do new things. Right before I started, speaking with you today, I was speaking with one of my salesmen from one of the paper companies I work with, who was informing me that they now have pre-magnetized sheets of paper that can run through a digital printing press. Whereas before you either had to use a big roll or you actually had to magnetize the stuff post-printing. So just, it sounds like a nerdy thing to get excited about, but I just thought that was so cool. Like there's just something new all the time. And even if it's just more mundane, like magnets, it's wildly fascinating to me how that there's someone out there thinking about doing this. I also just think like innovations generally, maybe not ones that are like specifically affecting me and my industry, but I think breakthroughs in health tend to really excite me. I've said before, I think it sometimes feels that the pace of development has slowed. And while that probably isn't necessarily true, which we're not seeing it, I think back to elementary school and, learning about the creation of the polio vaccines or how we eradicated smallpox. And I feel like we don't talk in absolutes in that way anymore. Today, we have some sort of procedure or drug that's able to get rid of 67% of people's symptoms, or they lower the rate of pain by a percentage. It's not, we're just getting rid of this. And it's frustrating to me sometimes. But then I see these developments and I know that some people don't like these kinds of drugs, but something like Ozempic and the weight loss drugs and the way in which like it's revolutionizing the health for some individuals. And I know that some will say it's a cheat code, but I've seen individuals that then get into fitness because they're able to get that kind of kickstart. And from what I understand, there's actually been research into this recently that shows that a lot of people taking these weight loss drugs wind up living healthier lifestyles, but they needed that kind of kickstart. I think another particular invention that excites me personally is Neuralink. I suffer from migraines, and there's been talk that they can try to deal with pain receptors by way of Neuralink. And when I see an individual that's able to control a computer screen with his mind simply because that's implanted in there, it says to me that there are limitless possibilities out there for controlling pain, helping individuals that suffer from blindness or aren't able to hear. It's very exciting to me. I think we're at a really interesting moment right now. And I think over the next 10 plus years, we're going to see like marvelous increases in the way in which people with any sort of, handicaps are able to find support and find ways in which that they're able to just go back to the life that they'd like to live.
I think it's interesting to think that today that innovation can be much more narrow and targeted in terms of its evolution. And to your point,
Yes.
before it was how can we take care of this when
Mhm.
now there's a more competent way of looking at some of the more quality of life elements that you
Yes.
can go in and make a very targeted enhancement to. So interesting perspective.
Yeah.
All right, so I have a few Matt Shapiro questions. So
All right,
try to
let's get
get your thoughts on these. So we know you're involved in real estate. So what are some of the immediate challenges that you see in developing real estate today?
Yeah, I mean, I think that zoning is often underappreciated, underdiscussed. And by underappreciated, I mean underappreciated by the policymakers who aren't considering the way in which zoning could be used to open up communities. I see in Philadelphia, for example, there are areas that are zoned residential single family for broad swaths of blocks in areas in which it's often very difficult for non-investors, say, to afford those single family homes. So then you have this situation where all the single family homes are just being bought up by investors that are then leasing them out to other individuals and like, all right, great, like let people make a living, but it's not usually investors like me or you. It's these huge multinational corporations that are buying all these houses and probably eventually going to try to squeeze people out of them such that they're able to knock all the buildings down and work their connections to build some sort of, commercial space. So I think that the city and cities generally should look long and hard about ways in which affordable housing specifically can be kind of encouraged by way of more permissive zoning. I also just think that there are a lot of requirements out there generally that make things needlessly difficult when you're seeking permitting processes, for example. They talk about it being, permits being necessary for safety. Safety is obviously arguably the most important aspect in any kind of construction project. But when you're charging thousands and thousands of dollars to developers to get a permit, to me, it kind of veers away from it being about safety and more of it into being revenue generating. I think there's ways to engender safety without it costing so much money, because when developers have to spend money, they pass that off. Now, we have an affordable housing crisis in this country as a whole, and I just don't think policymakers are really like critically thinking about ways in which we can kind of stifle that. There are very few, some cities have them, but a lot don't. Tax credits for individuals renting buildings or units below market. I think if you have a 50-unit building and you're renting the entirety of it below market, perhaps you should get a little credit on your property taxes because it'll encourage you to keep doing so. And I don't think that that's thought about enough. I also think that there's not enough knowledge in the public officials sometimes about the rules. And by that, I mean, if you go down to, say, the municipal services building in Philadelphia and you speak to 3 different people, you're probably going to get 3 different answers as to what you're supposed to do. Mm-hmm. And again, that makes things more expensive, and it makes people give up sometimes because there's this sense that landlords are just bad and they're all wealthy with a ton of buildings. I've been in court before, sitting next to an individual who was dealing with a squatter situation that was a 75-year-old African-American man that retired, took his life savings, bought a duplex, lived in half and rented the others. All right, a squatter moved into the other half of it. And it took him, I believe he told me, 9 months to get him to get this individual out, because there are huge protections for squatters' rights in a lot of big cities. And he said that it ruined him. He wasn't able to pay his mortgage. He was getting foreclosed upon. He was crying in court. And I just think that there needs to be some sort of expedited processes for a lot of real estate issues, not just like squatters and evictions, but things like, again, you want to get a permit, you want to get a certificate of occupancy, you want to, start building or demolish something. Shouldn't take 6 months to get these permits. I think that there needs to be some sort of there has to be a better working relationship, I think, between landlords and cities. And I just don't think that that's happening. And I don't always think there's a political will for it to happen either, because I think it's easy to paint landlords as bad, kind of back to what we were talking about earlier about entrepreneurship and, having success doesn't make you a bad person. Right. And I think that that's lost in political rhetoric a lot.
It's interesting as you kind of talk about the environment of real estate development. As a city, Philadelphia has really had this opportunity to flourish with not just at one time having real estate development take place in the downtown corridor, but now it's really expanding out into these neighborhoods with significant real estate development projects, which are such significant conversions of what that real estate was and how dormant it may have sat and what it now means in terms of bringing economic as well as quality of life, to those communities that it's in. So a lot of these items that you're pointing out, I'm sure, are even that much more intense because of
Yeah.
the level of evolution of real estate development. So good that you pointed those out.
Yeah, and I think it's very interesting. I think policymakers really need to look more critically at these things. I mean, just as one other just point to make, the Philadelphia Land Bank, I understand, as of at least a few years ago, I don't have the latest statistics, held more property than there were unhoused individuals in Philadelphia.
Wow.
And the land bank has been notorious for refusing to really work with anyone. I believe even, the different administrations have fought with the Philadelphia Land Bank. And it's mind-boggling to me that we have an affordable housing crisis, a homelessness crisis, but we have enough properties to make this work.
Right.
And there's got to be some way for a public and private partnership to get people into homes. I think it's just the easiest thing in the world. You give someone a contract, you give a developer a contract, all these units have to be rented below market for the next 50 years. But you develop it, and we give you the properties for a nominal sum. Mm-hmm. Like there's so many ways to kind of do it. And I've met with individuals at the land bank myself, and they traditionally just ghost you after you speak with them. So makes it a little difficult.
Well, it brings up a good point in terms of the next question I have, and that's really about how are young entrepreneurs like yourself really influencing and changing the business climate? I mean, you've certainly pointed out some of the inefficiencies, but how do you kind of see younger entrepreneurs like yourself with as much influence and vision making a difference in the business climate?
I think younger entrepreneurs are often maybe more aggressive in pushing boundaries and willing to ask for forgiveness instead of permission in many in many cases. I think that there are unique perspectives that younger entrepreneurs are getting by way of a much more diffuse media. You have podcasts are a very large source of news and media today. Social media is the same way, and I think the way in which younger folks are able to connect on these kind of different levels than others in the past have been able to, I think has allowed them to help push each other forward. These kind of group working spaces that you see all the time. People really want to lean on each other, and we're able to build on collective knowledge in a way that wasn't possible up until more recently. And I think they're showing what is possible. We really can push things forward, and I think we need to continue to do so and continue to kind of ask those tough questions and sometimes be unapologetic in our perspectives and not fear reprisal all the time. I think that that's the biggest thing that holds a lot of young entrepreneurs back, is that they're just afraid of someone saying something nasty to them, or they're afraid of maybe not getting a particular position or not winning a particular contract because they said something. But I think you need to be your true authentic self. And I think that it's wonderful that, younger entrepreneurs are increasingly being that true authentic self, that I am this person. I'm Matthew Shapiro. I'm a gay real estate developer that works with affordable, works in the affordable housing space. And, that's me. I tend to be less formal. I'm much more like, I'm casual in my interactions because I like to get comfortable with people, and I like to befriend the people I work with. And those kinds of that kind of informality, I think, is another thing that young entrepreneurs are really pushing. I mean, even if you look at fashion and athleisure, people go to work now in Lululemon. It's just different. And I think that kind of just sense of camaraderie, that comes back to that sense of camaraderie, rather of just, we all are equal. We all want to work with each other. I think that, people that have been in industries for a lot longer than me deserve my respect. But I also think that respect is two ways, right? I respect, someone older than me, and I think that someone older than me should respect me. It's like we're all in business together, and I think that we're kind of collectively all moving forward.
Very cool. I knew you'd answer that very well, so thank you for that.
I appreciate it.
I have two more questions before we call it quits. I know you've been very gracious in giving us your time. The first question I want to ask you is, what business associations are you involved with? I'm sure you contribute your voice in advancing businesses.
Yeah, I mean, the main one, I'm part of the Independence Business Alliance, which is the LGBT Chamber of Commerce in Philadelphia. So, I've definitely tried to be, I'd say, a voice in there. I think, everyone in any sort of business association has a unique perspective. I'd say that's the main one I'm in. I mean, admittedly, I've kind of been doing this for about 3 years at this point. So I'm starting, I think, to be cognizant of some other ones that I'd like to be a part of as well. I think in pre-show, you and I were talking about, a potential avenue that I thought was interesting as well in terms of joining some sort of association. And yeah, I'm excited to continue to build community. It's definitely something that I feel like I haven't done enough of yet, but I'm starting to do so increasingly.
Very cool. All right, so let's get away from business. So we know that you love to go to the gym. You believe in good health. So what's your secret to maintain your discipline?
I think it's hard because I don't know if there's necessarily a secret, but I would say like consistency is obviously key. If I miss one day, I'm going the next day. It doesn't matter how tired I am, how crappy I feel. If I've been out drinking till 2 a.m. the night before, I'm going to the gym at 6 a.m. if I missed the day before. But I think finding the things you enjoy is the more important piece of that. I have had a lot of friends that will go to the gym and they say, I hate this exercise, say deadlifts. Then don't do deadlifts. There's other exercises that hit those same muscles. Perhaps they're not the same degree of quality of exercise, but I think a lot of that is mumbo jumbo. And I think the fact that we constantly see research that is debunking myths about working out that people held as like almost biblical for the longest time shows that, the human body is interesting and everyone's body's differently. But finding that routine that you like, I think is important. And I think everyone will find something. People say, oh, I hate the gym, but you'll find something. And I think having a social aspect of it is wonderful too. I mean, that's what kind of encouraged me to really get into it when I was a little tepid about getting into working out, just meeting people with similar interests. I think gyms often can be communities, and seeing progress is addictive.
Wow.
I lost 50, 60 pounds when I was a freshman in college, and that was kind of, I'd say, the genesis of my love of fitness. And, looking in the mirror and seeing a body that made you proud was priceless. And I don't think being skinny or being muscular means that you should be or shouldn't be proud of your body. Like you should be proud of yourself. But if you have an objective, go after it.
Wow. Very cool. All right. So listen, our last and final question. So our podcast is entitled Something to Say. So we always like to conclude by asking those who we're interviewing. So what do you want to say?
I don't know I feel like the classic one. Hi, Mom. No, but I guess another cliche. I used that word earlier. So, but just be nice. That's what I tell people all the time. I've always been very into mentoring. I've had friends that are younger than me. In college, I like to do kind of community service that tended towards, helping students academically and, professionally. And the number one piece of advice I've always given to anyone that asks is to treat everyone with respect and kindness. To loop back to the point I made about my dad earlier, you should treat the janitor the same way you should treat the CEO. And honestly, I think sometimes it's best to be overly nice. There's going to be some people out there that don't like that think it's too much and don't respond well to it. But I believe on the whole, people are going to remember you. People remember the people that make them feel good about themselves, that make them feel warm and happy. Leave an impact and success will follow.
Wow. Well, I thought that was such an incredible way to conclude the conversation with you today, Matt. You have been very energized breath of fresh air in terms of doing an interview with us here on Something to Say. And your passion really comes quite clear in how it influences you both in your personal as well as in your business life. So we'd like to thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much. This is absolutely wonderful. It animated me just being here, and I'm very excited.
Terrific. So listeners, thank you so much for joining this episode of Something to Say podcast. And we encourage you to stay tuned for more inspiring conversations with voices from individuals from diverse backgrounds, sharing their passions. So until next time, this has been GregDeShields.
Thank you for tuning in to Something to Say. We trust you found some valuable insights and takeaways that can help you find your passion. Don't miss out on future episodes. Please subscribe, rate, and review us on your preferred platform. We value your feedback and suggestions, so let us know how we can serve you better. Keep the conversation going and stay inspired until we meet again. Take care and happy listening.